Today is Wednesday, June 13th, 2018, and my name is Lester Sharlach, and I have the honor today to interview Ann Peskin for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning.
Pleasure to see you here this morning. Ann, tell us your name.
Ann Peskin.
And what was your maiden name?
Ann Stern.
And where were you born?
In Manhattan, in Lenox Hill Hospital.
And what year was that?
1926.
So do you want to tell us how old you are now?
92.
And who were your grandparents?
The ones that were alive were Joseph and Charlotte Taubenhaus.
And how did they earn a living?
My grandfather and grandmother were opera singers, but when they came to the United States, my grandfather wasn't into the metropolitan, so he became a cantor. So he was a cantor at 82nd Street Synagogue.
Where did they immigrate from?
One from Vienna, my grandfather, and my grandmother from Bialystok.
Oh. And who were your parents?
My parents were Harry and Sylvia Stern.
And where did they live?
They were born in the United States in Manhattan, and they lived in New York City. Both were lawyers.
That was unusual for a woman lawyer at that
Yes.
period of time, I would assume.
She was a lawyer in 1920 and worked until I was born, and then picked up working when my father became ill when he was 48, and she took over his practice.
So they both earned their living in the law practice.
Right. My father started out as a teacher, and his first case was at $2,000, which was as much as he would have earned for the whole year as a teacher.
Mm-hmm. And what brought you to Stanford?
We were living in Manhattan in a very nice 7-room apartment, and the accountant said that it would make sense to buy a house. So we looked in many places and ended up in Stanford.
And where did you go to school?
I went to public school in Manhattan, junior high school in Manhattan, then I went to Hunter High, and then to Hunter College, and then I went on to a master's at Brown and a doctorate at NYU.
And was your family involved in politics or community service?
Yes, they were in both. My father was very active politically, interested in politics as much as anything, and my mother ran for a judgeship at one point.
Mm-hmm. Was he involved in any Jewish community services?
Yes, he actually ran the Hebrew school for Park Avenue Synagogue, among other things that he did.
Did you go to that Hebrew school?
I certainly did.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was involved in playing the organ at the synagogue.
Oh. So if they had an organ, it was conservative? Yeah. And what was your dinner table conversation like?
Well, by the time I can think of it, my grandmother and grandfather lived with us, because it was during the Depression and the families got together. And it varied in talk from politics to, of course, the children, and to my grandparents' interest in what they were doing.
Did your education influence your political views?
I think my father as well, because at that time when I went to college, he said, don't do anything about being a communist. And so that was cut off. And then I became very active as first a representative, then I ran for the SSGA, which was the council. I ran for president. At that time it was war, because that's 1942 to 46, and I ran what they called Minutemen, Minute Ladies, where we collected money. Remember the stamps, 25-cent stamps? We sold them at college and we put things together. I worked for the Red Cross, and then I got very involved in the politics of college.
In what way?
I was on the board and I spoke up in terms of what was to be done at the college, and that we would be involved in various activities that would be, I guess, war-oriented at the time. And I couldn't join because I wore glasses. I wanted to be in the Navy, and they didn't accept it.
You said you were on the board, but did you expand on that? What board was it that you were on?
Well, there was the Sing board, and I was business manager there. And on the regular Board of Representatives, what would be equivalent at the college level, and I was on that from the time I was a freshman till the time I was a senior. So I was quite active in the politics of the college.
And after leaving college, your political heroes growing up, or did someone specific or one area that you...
My heroes at that time were Roosevelt, Churchill, because things were happening that were very direct with them. And it's interesting, recently I've just read a book about her Churchill and watched Roosevelt, and they were very different people than I imagined them.
Mm-hmm.
They were really outstanding at that time. They represented the right side of the world as far as I was concerned.
Well, we talked about your political activities at college, and after you moved to Stanford, were you involved in any political parties? Or?
Yes, I was involved with the as soon as we moved here, we got involved with the North Stanford Democratic Club.
Where did you live in Stanford?
127 Thornridge Drive. I have not moved in a number of years. And we got involved, and there was a Ruth Linke who was on the Board of Ed. And I said to my husband, I think I'd like to do that. And that was when I got involved with Stanford politics. It was Ellen Kamhai who was involved, and they agreed that I would be a good candidate. And that was my first actual political involvement. I campaigned, which we'll talk about, and then I was on the board for 2 sessions.
When you were campaigning, did you have to raise money in the community?
Yes, but the money that you raised was like $2,000 in those days. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of money, and I got some of it from my friends who did not live here but supported me, as well as people around here. The campaigning was very different. The campaigning was in people's houses. You met with a group of, they arranged to have people for the evening, and you were invited. And that was basically, and the other way you got to know people was going to each of these different Polish club, the West Side Club, the Irish Club, and that turned out to be, I enjoyed it, and very interesting.
And what boards were you on in your career in politics in Stanford?
So I was on the Board of Ed.
What years?
I don't remember exactly. 75 to 86, something like that, I think. And then from there I went to the planning board for 10 years, And then I went on to the Board of Assessments. I was chairman of the Board of Assessments for about 10 years.
And what period of time was that?
That was fairly recent. That was like from, must have been around the 2000 period of time.
And while you were in the, active in the city politics, did you have a mentor?
Well, I would say a couple over the time. Bill Linke was one. There was another man that became a judge whose name I can't think of. He was very important before Bill Linke. And then Ellen Kem I pushed.
When you were looking back at your supporters, was being Jewish a help or a hindrance?
Help in some ways in these small meetings, because a group of Jews, they would get together and want to support me. Outside of that, I don't think it made any difference.
Is there any particular accomplishment that you feel you were supporting and came to fruition that was of great benefit to the citizens of Stamford?
On the board, well, there are different places. On the school board, my emphasis was on the academics, and I brought in it was the calculator at the beginning, so that the mathematics had something to do with it. And then when they had the budget, the emphasis was all on sports, and I brought in a math book that was from 1938 that the children were using, and I felt that we should, and we did, get newer math books. So my emphasis basically was to look at the budget and see a little more equity in it. That was one place. On the planning board, I had a different point of view. There was a lot of changes going on, a lot of commercial things, and also buildings were being built. And I felt that you had to take care of the citizens of Stamford, that they had to have enough parking spaces. There had to be trees in the parking lot. There had to be more, I would say, more quality of life for those who were living here and not for the developers. So that was my emphasis on the board. And then when I was on the Board of Assessments, I was concerned that the people that came in looking for tax adjustments got a fair deal. So I played different roles.
So were there any main issues during your term on the various boards that were memorable? Taxes, union, urban renewal, any other things?
Well, there were a couple of ones. There was concern for unions, and it was for the people that took care of the schools. We had to do contracts, and they had to get a fair deal, and they had to give us a fair deal, which was important. Redistricting, of course, was important, and we were involved with the redistricting, so there were many debates that went for the board all over town, and they were quite well, almost frightening, because people were very excited themselves and wanted to contain what was happening. What else was on the board? New superintendents. So it's pretty much a story of the unions, the superintendent, and also redistricting. And then my concern for education and the group that I was most interested in was not the very low group because they were getting money, and not the very bright because they got the best teachers, but that middle group that were there and they weren't given the attention that I felt was necessary because that's the group that lives and works in the city. So I worked for them.
So in your political career, is there any specific proud moment that you had?
I think part of it was being elected. It was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
The first time particularly, and the second time, I think it was President Carter was here, and we ran with him in a sense.
Yeah.
So the running for the board was exciting to me, and I enjoyed it. And being on the board was a very serious part of my life. It took up a lot of time, and you hoped you accomplished something. At least you did some control. Obviously, the superintendent has the biggest role.
Who was the superintendent at that time?
We had several. We went through 3. I have to think of who. You don't remember the names? No.
Okay. Tell us about your children. Who their names, and are they involved in politics today?
I have 3 children. I have Karen, Cameron, Lee Peskin, and Lisa Sourceville. The 3 were with me during all those political years. Some approved, some didn't. All vote, which is to me important. They were all ethical. The youngest is involved in politics in her area.
Where does she live?
Up in Vermont, Virginia. But she's been involved with the school board again. They all have something to say about politics. I'm not always happy about it right now.
What legacy do you feel you're leaving behind for the community, for the family?
You think? For the family, to be involved, to be active, to enjoy life by participating in it. For the community, that you can be active throughout your life in different ways. I feel I played a role in the school board at the time that I was there. I represented something different and supposedly valuable. And then I protected the community in my way.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think. I was interested, there is an area of the Board of Reps and the City Board that plays a role in who gets chosen to run. And that is very, very political. And that decides what happens in the city. And I think it's important that the right people are on it. There are some that were on the board that are now, Roz Nessen, for example, and Sue Nabel, so that anybody that's on active politics should stay active. I think that's my message.
Well, thank you very much, Ann. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. And we appreciate all the efforts you've had in getting interviews for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County.
Thank you.
Goodbye.